the red sun of Kepler-4, for to be cast long shadows across the ancient ruins, as Dr. Vexti stepped carefully through the broken stones. His 6 legs moved with grace over the rough ground, while his large eyes scanned every detail. The Zephyrian scientist had spent 3 years on this remote planet, studying the remains of a lost civilization. Behind him walked his research team. Each alien carried different tools for digging and recording. They had found many strange objects in these ruins, but nothing like what waited deep inside the crystal structure. Ahead, the building rose from the ground like a giant gemstone. Its walls were clear but thick, strong enough to survive thousands of years. The team had been trying to get inside for weeks today. They finally broke through the main entrance. Cool air rushed out. When the door opened, it smelled clean and fresh, like it had been sealed yesterday. Dr. Vexti felt his heart beating faster. This was the moment every scientist dreamed of. He stepped inside, with his team close behind. Strange lights began to glow along the walls. They seemed to respond to movement. The team walked down a long hallway, lined with empty chambers. Each room held different equipment that hummed with quiet power. Even after all these years, the technology still worked. At the end of the hall, they found a much larger chamber. The ceiling stretched high above them, filled with spinning patterns of light. In the center of the room stood something that made Dr. Vexti stop and stare. A clear tube rose from the floor to the ceiling. Inside the tube floated a creature unlike anything in their database. She had pale skin and long brown hair that moved slowly in the liquid around her. Her body was small compared to most intelligent species, but perfectly formed. Vexti moved closer. His instruments began recording everything. The creature wore simple clothes and appeared to be sleeping. Her chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. She was alive. The discovery sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Within hours, ships began arriving from across the galaxy. Representatives from dozens of species came to see this impossible find. The creature appeared to be human, and humans had been extinct for over 200 years. Dr. Vexti ran test after test. His equipment confirmed what seemed impossible. This was indeed a human. Female, in perfect condition. The biostasis field, keeping her alive, used technology far beyond current understanding. Even the Zephyrians, with all their knowledge, could not explain how it worked. News of the discovery reached the Galactic Council. The ruling body that governed most of known space declared the human a treasure of incredible value. They ordered her immediate transport to the Zephyrian capital world, where she could be properly studied and displayed. Katie Sullivan had no knowledge of the excitement she was causing. She floated in her crystal prison, unaware that her world had ended centuries ago. Her last memory was of lying down in the emergency stasis pod. As explosions rocked her research station, the attacking ships had come from nowhere, giving her people no time to escape. The transport ship that carried Katie away from Kepler-4 to B was the largest vessel many had ever seen. Thousands of aliens wanted to witness the moving of the last human. The journey took 3 weeks, during which time more ships joined the convoy. By the time they reached the capital, the fleet stretched across space for millions of miles. The Zephyrian capital world gleamed like a jewel against the black of space. Massive cities covered every continent, connected by bridges that spanned entire oceans. The Museum of Natural History stood at the heart of the largest city. Its crystal spires reached toward the clouds. Dr. Vexti supervised every step of moving Katie into her new home. The museum had cleared their entire extinct species wing to make room for the human exhibit. The chamber they built for her was a work of art. Clear walls surrounded by displays explaining human history and culture. The information about humans came from old records and artifacts. Most of it was wrong or incomplete. The aliens had never really understood human civilization. They knew humans had fought many wars and eventually destroyed themselves. The truth was much more complex, but the museum visitors did not need to know that when Katie was finally placed in her new prison, thousands of aliens lined up to see her. The exhibit opened to huge crowds that came from every corner of the galaxy. Parents brought their children to see the last member of a dead race. Scientists came to study her form. Artists came to capture her image in their work. Dr. Vexty stood in his office high above the exhibit watching the crowds below. He felt proud of his discovery. It would make him famous throughout the galaxy. His name would be remembered forever as the scientist who found the last human far below. Katie floated in her tube surrounded by alien faces that pressed against the glass every day. Thousands of visitors came to stare at her. Some pointed and laughed, others took pictures. Many brought their young ones to see the strange creature from a lost world. The exhibit included holographic displays that showed what the aliens thought human life had been like. Most of the information was wrong. They showed humans as violent primitives who had destroyed their own planet through war and greed. The real story of human achievement and culture was lost too. Months passed, and the crowds never stopped coming. Katie became the most popular exhibit in the galaxy. Tourism to the Zephyrian capital increased by 300%. Hotels were booked solid. 4 years in advance, the museum made more money than ever before. Darvextai published paper after paper about his discovery. He became the leading expert on human biology. Even though he had never actually spoken to a human, he ran tests on the stasis field and took tissue samples for study. Everything was done in the name of science. The other exhibits in the extinct species wing were soon forgotten. Everyone wanted to see the human. She was displayed like a rare gem or ancient artifact, something beautiful and mysterious, from a time long past. The fact that she was a living being with thoughts and feelings never occurred to most visitors. As the months turned into years, Katie remained trapped in her crystal prison. She had become the galaxy's greatest treasure and its most tragic prisoner. The aliens who came to see her thought they were honoring human memory. They had no idea they were committing one of the greatest crimes in galactic history. The last human had become a museum piece. But somewhere in the dark corners of space, other humans still lived. One of them would soon learn about Katie's fate, and when he did, nothing would stop him from bringing her home. The stasis field around Katie began to change in ways Dr. Vexty could not understand. Small fluctuations appeared in the energy readings. Numbers that should have stayed constant started to shift. The Zephyrian scientist frowned at his instruments, but dismissed the changes as equipment errors deep inside the biostasis tube. Katie's mind stirred for the first time in centuries. Her thoughts moved like shadows in the darkness. Fragments of memory drifted through her consciousness. The sound of alarms, the flash of explosions, the cold embrace of the stasis pod as it closed around her. Her neural patterns showed increasing activity. But Dr. Vextai did not recognize the signs. He had studied the readings for years without understanding what they meant. Human brain activity was unlike anything in his database. The alien scientist saw only numbers and graphs, not the awakening of a human soul. Katie's awareness grew stronger each day. At first she felt nothing but confusion. Then slowly, the world around her began to take shape. She could sense light and movement beyond her crystal prison. Sounds reached her ears, muffled and strange. The excited chatter of alien voices filled with words she did not understand. She tried to move, but her body would not respond. The stasis field held her in perfect stillness, while her mind screamed for freedom. She could feel every part of herself, but control nothing. It was like being buried alive with only her thoughts for company. The crowds that came to see her grew larger each day. Katie became aware of the faces pressed against the glass. Alien children pointed at her, with appendages that looked nothing like human hands. Their parents held strange devices that flashed with light, taking endless pictures of her trapped form. Hours turned into days, and days into weeks. Katie's consciousness continued to strengthen. She began to understand that she was being displayed like an object. Her human dignity meant nothing to these creatures. She was their prize, exhibit a curiosity from a dead race. The psychological torture was beyond anything she had ever imagined. She could hear everything around her but could not speak, could see the alien faces staring at her but could not look away, could feel her own heartbeat but could not control her breathing. The stasis field had become her prison, and her hell. Meanwhile, in the outer rim territories of the galaxy, a different story was unfolding. Jake Morrison sat in a dark cantina on Zip Prime nursing a drink that burned his throat. The establishment catered to the worst criminals and outcasts in the sector, perfect for a human who needed to stay hidden. Jake had learned long ago to keep his head down and his mouth shut. Humans were supposed to be extinct, and he intended to keep it that way. He had survived the Great Purge by being smarter and more careful than most. Others had tried to fight back or find other survivors. Most of them were dead. The cantina buzzed with conversation in dozens of alien languages. Jake understood most of them after years of living among different species. He had learned to blend in, to become invisible, just another face in the crowd of criminals and smugglers. Then he heard something that made his blood run cold. A Corvan trader was bragging about his recent trip to the Zephyrian capital. He spoke of the amazing human exhibit that had made the museum famous across the galaxy. The last member of a dead species preserved for all to see. Hand tightened around his drink as the Corvan described the display, the female human floating in her crystal tube. The crowds that came from across space to witness this archaeological marvel. Jake felt sick to his stomach. Someone had found a human survivor and turned her into a zoo animal. He forced himself to remain calm, to show no reaction. Years of hiding had taught him to control his emotions. Jake finished his drink and left the cantina without a word, but inside his mind was racing. The implications of what he had heard were staggering. Back in his small apartment, Jake accessed the galactic information networks. Using false identities and encrypted connections, he searched for news about the human exhibit. The stories he found made his anger burn hotter. With each word, Katie Sullivan, age unknown, found in stasis on Kepler 4 to be the last known human in existence. Now displayed in the Museum of Natural History on Zephyros Prime, viewed by millions of visitors who came to see the extinct species exhibit. Jake stared at her image on his screen. She was beautiful and peaceful looking. Unaware of her situation, the museum described her as a perfect specimen, a window into the lost civilization of humanity. Jake wanted to put his fist through the wall for the first time in decades. Jake allowed himself to remember Earth, the blue skies and green forests, the cities full of human voices, the families and friends he had lost when the Krill Empire decided that humans were too dangerous to live. He had been a commander in the Earth Defense Force when the attacks began. The human fleet had fought bravely, but they were outnumbered 1,000 to 1. Most humans died in the first wave of strikes. Those who survived were hunted down one by one across the galaxy. Jake was one of perhaps a dozen humans still alive. He had spent years searching for others, finding only empty ships and abandoned colonies. The universe seemed determined to erase every trace of human existence. Now they had turned one of his people into a museum. Peace. Sleep did not come easily that night. Jake lay awake, planning what seemed like an impossible mission. He had no ship, no crew, no resources. How could one man rescue someone from the most heavily guarded museum in the galaxy? But Katie Sullivan was human. She was his responsibility, whether she knew it or not. Every day she spent in that crystal prison was a crime against their entire species. Jake had failed to save Earth, but he would not failed to save her. The next morning, Jake began making contacts. He reached out to old friends and newer acquaintances, people who owed him favors, or might be bought with the right price. He needed information about the museum, its security systems, and the stasis technology holding Katie. News traveled fast in the criminal underworld. Within days, Jake learned that others were interested in the human exhibit. Some wanted to steal her for private collectors. Others hoped to ransom her back to the museum, but Jake's motives were different. He wanted to set her free. Months of planning followed. Jake studied every detail he could find about the Museum of Natural History. He learned the guard schedules, the security systems, the layout of every floor. He watched video footage of Katie's exhibit until he had memorized every angle. The stasis field was the biggest challenge. Jake was no scientist, but he understood enough about the technology to know it was incredibly dangerous. One wrong move could kill Katie instantly. He needed expert help, but finding allies would mean revealing his own identity as Jake worked on his impossible plan. Katie's situation grew worse. The stasis field continued to deteriorate. Dr. Vexty became concerned about his prize specimen. He began making preparations to transfer her to a more advanced containment system. Katie could sense the changes in her prison. The energy around her felt different, somehow more unstable. She did not understand the technology, but she could feel it failing. Her body ached in ways that should not have been possible. While in stasis, the crowds kept coming every day. More alien faces pressed against her glass. More pictures were taken. More children pointed and laughed at the strange human creature. Katie's rage grew stronger with each passing hour. She was not an exhibit, she was a person, but trapped in her crystal tomb. Katie could do nothing but wait and hope. Someone, somewhere, would remember that humans were more than just museum pieces. Someone would come for her. Katie's world had become a nightmare of consciousness trapped in crystal. Her awareness grew stronger each day, but her body remained frozen in the failing stasis field. She could see everything around her with perfect clarity: the alien faces that pressed against her prison, the flashing lights of their cameras, the pointing gestures that treated her like an object. The first thing she noticed were the children, small alien beings, with large eyes and curious expressions. They would run up to her exhibit and press their faces against the transparent aluminum. Their parents would lift them higher so they could get a better view of the strange human creature. Wanted to scream at them that she was not a thing to be stared at. She was a person with thoughts and feelings and dreams, but her voice was trapped along with her body. The stasis field held her in perfect stillness, while her mind raged against its prison. Dar Vextai visited her exhibit every morning to check the readings. From his instruments he would stand before her crystal tube, taking notes and speaking into his recording device. Katie could hear every word, even though she could not understand the Zephyrian language. His tone was always clinical and detached, like she was nothing more than an interesting specimen. The alien scientist had no idea that Katie was aware and listening. He began conducting more tests. As the stasis field became unstable, tissue samples were taken through microscopic needles that passed through the containment barrier. Katie felt every probe, every scan, every violation of her body, but could do nothing to stop it. Days blended into weeks as Katie's psychological torment continued. She learned to recognize the regular visitors. A group of young Andromedans came every few days and always made the same jokes about human appearance. An elderly Centaurian scholar spent hours studying the information displays and shaking his head sadly at the primitive nature of human civilization. Museum had created an entire narrative around her species, based on incomplete and often wrong information. The displays showed humans as violent savages who had destroyed their own world. Through endless wars, Katie knew the real history of her people, the scientific achievements, the art and literature, the exploration of space, and the colonies they had built among the stars. But that history was lost. The aliens who came to see her believed they were viewing the last remnant of a failed species. They felt superior to the primitive humans who had been too violent and short-sighted to survive. Katie's anger burned hotter with each passing day. The worst part was the complete lack of dignity. The aliens treated her like a rare animal. In a zoo, they brought their food into the exhibit hall and ate while staring at her. Some visitors would mimic what they thought were human behaviors, making exaggerated gestures and sounds that bore no resemblance to actual human culture. Tried to move, tried to break free from the stasis field, but the technology was too advanced. Her body remained perfectly still, while her mind screamed in frustration. She was trapped in a crystal coffin, while the galaxy forgot what it meant to be human. Dr. Vextai's tests became more invasive as weeks passed. He was fascinated by human physiology and wanted to understand every aspect of her biology. Brain scans were performed while Katie was fully conscious. Neural probes mapped her thought patterns while she helplessly endured the violation. The Zephyrian scientist published papers about his research. Katie had become the subject of hundreds of scientific studies. Her body was analyzed, her DNA was sequenced, her brain activity was mapped, all without her consent, and all while she was aware of every procedure other scientists from across the galaxy requested permission to study. Her doctor, Vextai, allowed some access, but jealously guarded his prized discovery. Katie became a living laboratory for alien researchers who saw her as nothing more than an interesting biological puzzle. The crowds never stopped coming. Tourism to Zephyros Prime had increased dramatically since Katie's arrival. The museum was forced to extend visiting hours and limit the time each group could spend at her exhibit. Still, the lines stretched around the building every day. Katie learned to read the different types of visitors. The scientists who studied her with cold, analytical eyes, the tourists who took pictures and moved on quickly, the parents who used her as an educational tool to teach their children about extinct species. Some visitors showed more respect than others. A few would stand quietly before her exhibit, as if paying tribute to a lost civilization. But most treated her like entertainment, a curiosity from the past, with no real meaning or value. As months passed, Katie's condition began to deteriorate. Along with the stasis field, the energy fluctuations were causing physical problems that Dr. Vextai could not explain. Her heart rate became irregular. Her brain patterns showed signs of stress and trauma. The alien scientist interpreted these changes as system malfunctions, rather than the psychological effects of prolonged imprisonment. He began making plans to transfer Katie to a more advanced containment system, one that would be impossible to escape from. Katie sensed the approaching danger. Even though she could not understand the technical discussions around her exhibit, she could feel the stasis field becoming more unstable, but she also noticed increased activity among the museum staff. Something was going to change, and she feared it would make her situation even worse. Meanwhile, in the depths of space, Jake Morrison was putting together the most dangerous plan of his life. He had spent months gathering information about the Museum of Natural History and the security systems. Protecting Katie's exhibit, the challenges seemed impossible, but he refused to give up. Jake had found allies among the galaxy's criminal underworld, people who had their own reasons for wanting to strike against the established order. A reformed Zephyrian hacker named Nyx, who had grown disgusted with his own species' arrogance. A human smuggler named Lisa Hayes, who Jake had rescued from Krill slavers years earlier. Together, they studied every detail of the museum's defenses, the guard rotations, the sensor networks, the backup power systems. Jake knew they would have only one chance to rescue Katie, and failure would mean death or capture for all of them back in her crystal prison. Katie continued to endure the daily parade of alien visitors. Her strength was failing along with the stasis technology, but her determination remained strong. She was human, and humans did not give up, no matter how hopeless things seemed. She thought about Earth and the life she had lost, the research station where she had worked, the colleagues who had become like family, the dreams of discovery that had driven her to the outer colonies. All of that was gone now, but she was still alive, and that meant something. Katie began to notice patterns in the museum's daily routine. The changing of the guards, the cleaning schedules, the times when visitor traffic was lightest. She stored every detail in her memory, hoping against hope that somehow the information might be useful. She also began to sense something else: changes in the energy around her exhibit, fluctuations that felt different from the normal deterioration of the stasis field, almost like someone was probing the system, testing its defenses for the first time since awakening in her crystal tomb. Katie allowed herself to hope maybe someone out there remembered that humans were more than museum pieces. Maybe rescue was possible after all. Jake Morrison stood in the cargo hold of a stolen freighter, studying holographic displays of the Museum of Natural History. The three-dimensional images showed every floor, every corridor, every security checkpoint. He had been planning Katie's rescue 4 months, and finally the pieces were coming together. His team gathered around the display table. Nyx, the reformed Zephyrian hacker, sat hunched over his portable computer. His 6 fingers moved rapidly across alien keyboards as he probed the museum's security networks. Lisa Hayes leaned against a bulkhead, cleaning her plasma rifle with practiced efficiency. The former smuggler had agreed to pilot their escape ship, and provide covering fire. The third member of their team was the most unlikely. Ally of all, Koroth was a disgraced Klingari warrior who had lost his honor in a failed military campaign. Jake had found him drinking himself to death in a frontier bar and offered him a chance at redemption. The massive alien stood over 8 feet tall with 4 arms and skin like living stone. Jake pointed to different sections of the museum layout as he explained the plan. They would strike during Extinction Day, the annual celebration that brought huge crowds to see the extinct species. Exhibit's security would be focused on crowd control rather than protecting individual displays. Plan was complex but necessary. Nyx would create a system-wide power fluctuation that would disable most of the museum's security networks. Lisa would position their ship above the crystal dome that covered the main exhibition hall, ready to provide extraction when needed. Koroth would create a distraction in the ancient weapons display. His job was to draw security forces away from Katie's location, while making it look like an accident. The Klingari warrior was perfect for the role, since his people were known for their aggressive nature. Jake would use the confusion to reach the extinct species wing and attempt to free Katie from her failing stasis field. This was the most dangerous part of the mission. The biostasis technology was beyond human understanding, and one wrong move could kill her. Instantly, they had studied the system for weeks, using information stolen from Dr. Vexti's research files. The stasis field was powered by crystalline energy matrices that had to be disabled in a specific sequence. Any deviation from the proper shutdown procedure would cause massive system failure. Jake had spent years learning alien technology. During his time in hiding, he understood enough about energy systems to attempt the rescue, but success was far from guaranteed. The margin for error was microscopic, and the consequences of failure were death. As they prepared for the mission, Jake reflected on what it meant to be human in a galaxy that considered his species extinct. He remembered Earth's destruction and the scattered survivors who had tried to rebuild their lives. Among alien civilizations, most had died or disappeared over the decades. The weight of preserving human dignity and memory rested on his shoulders. This was not just about saving Katie, it was about proving that humanity refused to be reduced to a museum curiosity. They were a proud species with a right to exist free from the glass cages that aliens tried to put them in. Lisa checked their escape route one final time. Her ship, the Wanderer, was fast enough to outrun most pursuit vessels, but they would only have minutes to get clear of the capital world's defense grid. Once the alarm was raised, the entire system would lock down to prevent their escape. Nyx finished his preparations and looked up from his computer. The museum's security network was more advanced than he had expected, but he had found weaknesses. The power fluctuation would last exactly 17 minutes. Long enough for the team to complete their mission, but not so long as to cause permanent damage. Koroth sharpened his ceremonial blades and performed the ritual prayers of his people. The Klingari warrior had been exiled from his homeworld for cowardice, but Jake saw strength in him. This mission would either restore his honor or provide him with an honorable death. The night before the mission, Jake sat alone in his quarters, studying Katie's file. The information was limited, but he had learned her name and some details about her life. She had been a xenobiologist working on a research station when the Krill attacks began. Her specialty was studying alien plant life. On frontier worlds, Katie Sullivan had been trying to preserve life when the stasis pod saved her. Now she was trapped in a crystal prison while aliens gawked at her like she was some kind of scientific curiosity. Jake's anger burned cold and steady. He would not let her suffer anymore. Meanwhile, in the museum, Katie's condition continued to deteriorate. The failing stasis field was causing increasing pain as her body fought against the alien technology. Dr. Vexti had noticed the problems and was making preparations to transfer her to a more advanced containment system. The transfer was scheduled to take place after Extinction Day, when the crowds would be smaller and the procedure could be performed without interference. Once Katie was moved to the new system, rescue would become impossible. The advanced containment technology was designed to be completely escape-proof. Katie sensed the urgency in the aliens around her exhibit. Dr. Vexti visited more frequently and seemed worried about something. The other scientists spoke in hushed tones and kept checking their instruments. She knew something was about to change, but had no way to influence what happened on the morning of Extinction Day. Thousands of visitors lined up outside the Museum of Natural History. The annual celebration drew beings from across the galaxy who came to learn about extinct species and the importance of preservation. Katie watched through her crystal prison as the crowds gathered. Dear Vexty performed his final checks on her stasis system. Tomorrow, she would be moved to the new containment facility, where she could be studied more extensively. The Zephyrian scientist was excited about the possibilities the advanced system would allow for much more detailed research. Jake and his team made their final preparations as crowds poured into the museum. Nix positioned himself in a maintenance tunnel beneath the building where he could access the main power systems. Lisa took the Wanderer to high orbit, disguised as a tourist transport. Korath entered the museum with the early morning visitors. His massive frame and obvious warrior bearing made him stand out, but security guards assumed he was just another tourist. The Klingari made his way slowly toward the ancient weapons display, studying each exhibit with apparent interest. Jake waited until the crowds reached their peak before entering the museum. He had disguised himself as a Terrellian trader, complete with prosthetic facial ridges and contact lenses that changed his eye color. The transformation was convincing enough to fool casual inspection. Moving through the crowded halls, Jake made his way toward the extinct species wing. His heart pounded as he saw the signs pointing toward Katie's exhibit. After months of planning, the moment of truth was finally at hand. In her crystal prison, Katie watched the Extinction Day crowds with growing despair. These aliens had turned her people's death into a celebration. They came to gawk at the last human like she was some kind of trophy, more proof of their own species' superiority. But something felt different today. There was tension in the air that had not been there before. The museum staff seemed nervous about something. Security guards checked their equipment more frequently than usual. Katie did not know that rescue was coming, but deep in her human heart, she felt a spark of hope somewhere in the galaxy. There might be others like her, people who remembered what it meant to be human and refused to let their species be forgotten. The time for action was approaching, and soon the last human exhibit would be shattered forever. The moment Jake had been planning for finally arrived, as thousands of alien visitors crowded the Museum of Natural History celebrating Extinction Day. He moved through the halls toward Katie's prison. His disguise held as security guards focused on managing the massive crowds rather than checking individual visitors. Deep beneath the building, Nix began his assault on the museum's power grid. His fingers danced across modified keyboards as he infiltrated system after system. The hacker had spent weeks studying the museum's infrastructure and knew exactly which circuits to target. At precisely noon, the power fluctuation began. Lights flickered throughout the building as energy surged through overloaded systems. Security monitors went dark, automated systems shut down, emergency lighting activated as backup power struggled to maintain critical functions. In the ancient weapons display, Korath made his move. The massive Klingari warrior approached a ceremonial battle axe from his homeworld and began examining it closely when the security guard approached to tell him not to touch the exhibits. Korath pretended to stumble backward. The 8-foot alien crashed into a display case containing priceless artifacts from the old Terran Empire. The sound of breaking crystal echoed through the hall as ancient weapons scattered across the floor. Security alarms began wailing as guards rushed to contain the damage. Jake used the chaos to reach the extinct species wing. The hallway was nearly empty, as most visitors had been drawn toward the commotion in the main galleries. He moved quickly past displays of long-dead creatures toward the chamber that held Katie Sullivan. The transparent aluminum barrier that surrounded Katie's exhibit gleamed under the emergency lighting. Jake could see her floating in the failing stasis field, her eyes closed, but her face showing signs of distress. The bio readings on nearby monitors indicated that her condition was deteriorating rapidly. For a moment, Jake stopped and stared at the first human he had seen in decades. Katie looked peaceful, but he could see the stress lines around her eyes. The tension in her body that spoke of psychological trauma she had been aware all along. Suffering in silence while aliens treated her like a museum, Peace Jake pulled out the modified plasma charges he had prepared for this moment. The devices were calibrated to cut through the transparent aluminum without damaging the delicate stasis. Equipment inside one mistake could cause an explosion that would kill them both. As he began placing the charges, Katie's eyes opened. Her gaze met his through the crystal barrier, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Human recognition passed between them. The first contact either had experienced with their own species in years of isolation. Katie's eyes widened as she realized what was happening. Someone had come for her. Someone who understood that she was more than just an exhibit. Jake saw the hope and desperation in her expression and knew he could not fail. The plasma charges activated with brilliant flashes of light. The transparent aluminum began to crack and splinter. As the cutting beams did their work, Jake had to move carefully, disabling each section of the barrier in sequence to avoid triggering the stasis. Field safety systems alarms began blaring throughout the extinct species wing as sensors detected the breach. Jake worked faster, knowing that security forces would arrive within minutes. He had practiced this procedure countless times, but the real thing was far more stressful than any simulation. Dr. Vextai was in his office when the alarms sounded. The Zephyrian scientist rushed toward Katie's exhibit, his 6 legs carrying him faster than he had ever moved. His prize specimen was in danger. The greatest discovery of his career might be lost. Transparent aluminum finally gave way. With a sound like breaking thunder, Jake reached into the stasis tube and began the delicate process of shutting down the biostasis field. The energy matrices had to be disabled in a precise sequence or the resulting bait feedback could kill Katie. Instantly, Katie felt the change immediately as the stasis field began to weaken. For the first time in months, she could move her fingers. Her voice returned as a whisper, but she could finally speak. Jake heard her say, "Thank you," in a voice hoarse from disuse. The shutdown process seemed to take forever, but finally, the last energy matrix went dark. The stasis fluid began draining from the tube as Jake reached in to lift Katie from her crystal prison. She was weak from months of immobility, but alive and aware. Dr. Vextai arrived just as Jake pulled Katie from the ruined exhibit. The alien scientist stared in horror as his priceless specimen was being stolen. He could not comprehend that he was witnessing the rescue of a sentient being rather than the theft of an artifact. Security forces poured into the extinct species wing, but they were too late. Jake carried Katie in his arms as they fought their way toward the extraction point. Plasma bolts filled the air as guards tried to stop what they saw as the theft of Galactic HFY appeared from a side corridor, his massive frame blocking pursuit as he engaged the security forces. The Klingari warrior fought with desperate courage, knowing that this mission would either restore his honor or provide him with a glorious death above the museum. Lisa brought the Wanderer into position, the smuggler ship's weapons charged, as she prepared to blast through the crystal dome that covered the main exhibition hall. The escape route was ready, but the team had to reach it. First, Jake reached the main hall as Lisa's ship descended through the shattered dome. The Wanderer's engines roared as emergency systems tried to contain the breach. Visitors screamed and ran for exits as debris rained down from above. Katie struggled to stay conscious as Jake carried her toward the ship. Her body was weak from months in stasis, but her mind was clear. She was free from her crystal prison and in the arms of another human. It seemed too good to be true. The extraction was successful, despite heavy resistance. Jake and Katie made it aboard the Wanderer, just as Koroth arrived with Nyx close behind. The team was complete and their mission accomplished. As Lisa engaged the hyperdrive, they left Zephyros Prime far behind in the days that followed. Katie slowly recovered her strength. Jake told her about the years that had passed since her capture, the fate of Earth and humanity, the small community of survivors scattered across the galaxy. She learned that she possessed knowledge from before, the great purge that could be vital to their species' future. The rescue had consequences throughout the galaxy. The Zephyrians and other species were forced to confront the reality that humans still existed. The treatment of Katie sparked debates about consciousness, species rights, and the ethics of keeping sentient beings. As exhibits, Katie looked out at the stars as their ship traveled toward a hidden human settlement. She was no longer trapped behind glass, but free among the infinite possibilities of space. The last human exhibit had been shattered, but from its broken pieces hope for humanity's future began to emerge. Dr. Vexty stood in his ruined museum staring at the empty space where his greatest discovery had been displayed. He finally understood that he had not been preserving human culture but destroying it. The real treasure had not been the specimen but the living being trapped. Inside, Jake and Katie began planning to locate other human survivors and work toward rebuilding their species' presence in the galaxy. They had proven that humanity would not go quietly into extinction, that their dignity and freedom could not be taken away. The galaxy had tried to turn them into museum pieces, but humans were meant to be free. Among the stars, the exhibit was broken, and the prisoner was free. Now the real work of rebuilding humanity could begin.